Hey, what's up guys? Joel Adams with Iridesium, and I am back with another pretty cool tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at creating an explosion inside Blender's new smoke simulator. Creating explosions in Mantaflow is kind of tricky because Mantaflow is not that fast. Hopefully in the future we can speed up its performance, maybe even make it real time. So anyway, let's jump right in and get started. I'm going to start by hitting A to select everything and then delete everything because it's all useless. Now we're going to add in a floor plane. So add in a plane, scale it up to maybe 8. Go to your physics tab and choose collision. I'm going to turn this particle damping and friction up, then set the randomize up a little bit as well. Then I'm going to add in our first emitter that is going to be an icosphere. Scale it down and set it above the floor plane, something like that. Then go over to the particle settings tab and add a new particle system. If you hit spacebar, you're going to see some particles jetting out. That's fine. I'm going to turn our end frame here to 50 so we don't have to wait very long for the explosion to refresh. Set the start frame on the particles to 10 and the end frame to, I don't know, maybe 15. Yep, something like that. Turn the life down to maybe 7. Then go under velocity. Turn the normal up to, I'm going to say 6, and the randomize up to 6 as well. Yeah, that's pretty decent. Like, that's already looking nice. So I'm going to turn the lifetime down again to 5, and I'm going to call this our first emitter. If you look at an explosion, you're going to notice that there's not just one big blast right at the beginning. There's actually several blasts. So there's like a main explosion, and then there's a couple smaller explosions inside that one. So let's go Shift S, cursor to selected. I'm going to add in a plane. Scale it down to be roughly the size of this sphere, tab into edit mode, and move it up so it's right above the sphere. You can use R to rotate, or you can use these. This is scale tool to actually make your object bigger, rotate tool to rotate it, translate tool in case your cube is in Latin. Then what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this with R off to the side. I'm going to add a new particle system. And then I'm going to turn the normal velocity up, so it's just jetting out. Actually, let's hit Alt-R to clear the rotation so we can see it jetting up into the sky. I'm going to set this to 6, just like the sphere was. And we'll set the randomize to 6 as well, see how that works. Okay, that's a little too much. Let's try 5, and then 7 here. Okay, let's try 4 for the randomize. Now I'm going to set the start keyframe to 10, and the end keyframe to 14. Yeah, that's not bad. That's pretty decent. Let's turn the lifetime down to 5. Now I'm going to turn this randomize down yet again to 3, and this up to maybe 8. So now we've got a very basic emitter. I'm going to rotate this off to the side so it's sort of jetting down at the ground. And if we look from the top view, you can see our explosion is not shaped perfectly spherical, but it actually has this thing jetting off the side. Now what you can do is duplicate this and rotate it around on the Z-axis to make our explosion again more kind of oval shaped. So now with these emitters, we can finally add in the smoke. Before you add in the smoke, go ahead and save your file, Control S, and save it somewhere on your hard drive. Once you've got it saved, you can grab your middle explosion emitter, which is this little sphere, and go Object, Quick Effects, and Quick Smoke. I'm going to move this up on the Z-axis and hit period to scale it around the 3D cursor. Scale it up. And, actually Shift C to center your 3D cursor again. It was on the sphere, so it was scaling weird. Something like that. And then on the Z-axis. Now, you want to keep in mind that your explosion is going to behave differently according to its scale. So you want to make sure it's real world scale. So if I add in a cube and we hit N to open up this panel right here, you're going to see that the dimensions are 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. And I think that's pretty decent. That's like a medium-sized explosion. It's not enormous and it's not a grenade. So let's just leave it like that. So I'm going to scale this down on the Z-axis just a tiny bit, and then let's go to its settings. If you go to the physics tab, you're going to see the fluid settings here. So on this big cube, a fluid type has been added under the physics. You can see it set to domain. Under the settings, the domain type is set to gas because we're doing a gas simulation, not a liquid simulation. This is the resolution divisions of the gas, so how high or low quality the simulation will be. You've got time scale, don't touch that. You've got CFL number. That's kind of a complicated value. Also, do not touch that. And then you've got your data bake right here, so you can make your cube baked. I'm not going to bake it yet. Let's change a couple things first. Under your smoke settings, you've got a vorticity value right here. Set that to 0.1. 0.1 is pretty high, and I would not recommend going over 0.2 because you can get some crazy stuff with vorticity. Then you've got adaptive domain. I'm going to turn this on. Adaptive domain is a very dangerous setting. You can get a lot of clipping, which will really screw up your simulation. Either turn it off completely if you're getting clipping, or just leave it on and then carefully adjust your shader to not show the clipping. Then you've got noise right here. I'll show you how to use noise later, but we're not going to use it at the moment. And last, you've got your cache settings. I'm going to set our end frame to 100. Usually I use 150 to 200 so I can get an idea of what the simulation is going to be. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it at 100. I'm going to go ahead and set the cache directory. The simulation files are going to be really, really big, depending on how high resolution your explosion is. So just make sure that when you're done rendering your explosion, when you're done with the explosion completely, that you delete your cache folder. So if I go ahead and hit bake on this, it's going to bake pretty quick, and I can hit escape. And if we play this back, you can see a tiny little wisp of smoke comes up, and then that's it, and it's over. That's because there are more settings to the simulation. Go ahead and click free right here to free that bake. It's going to delete all the old files and give you your domain back. Now select your sphere, and you can see that there's a whole bunch more settings. It's set to flow. It's set to smoke. I'm going to set it to fire and smoke just in case. Then this inflow is correct. You don't want it to be set to geometry. Then you've got some initial temperature, density, fuel. Leave all that the way it is. What you're going to want to do is go under flow source, choose mesh, particles, and choose your particle system. That way, instead of being emitted from the actual geometry here, it's going to be emitted from the particles, which is what you want. And then you're going to want to choose initial velocity so that the smoke is really jetted out with the particles. So I'm going to do the same thing for these planes. Choose fluid, flow, fire and smoke. Choose inflow, so it's not just one initial geometry, it's just constantly breaking the wind. Then go under here and choose particles, particle settings, and initial velocity. Now, instead of doing all this to the other plane, I'm just going to delete the other plane, select this one, duplicate it, and rotate it around. So now we've got 3 emitters and a domain. Let's go ahead and bake this and see if it's any better. You can see that it's taking a lot longer to bake. However, if you are curious to how your explosion looks, just hit escape anytime. That will pause the simulation. You can then hit resume to finish the simulation, whatever. I'm going to hit escape and look at it. So the first thing you'll notice is that the smoke is dark gray and it's hard to see against the background. If I add in a light sun lamp, rotate this, put it off to the side, choose period to move back to the median point, and I resume, you're going to notice the next few frames are actually baked with lighting, kind of ridiculous looking lighting, and it's easier to see. So let's hit free bake, go under viewport display, and choose color mapping. That's how I like to view my explosions. Now if you bake this again, you're not really able to see the fire anymore, but you can see a lot clearer picture of the actual explosion. You can see the density, which is really nice. Now, because of the noise we added, we're getting some nice little bubbles in here, and it's overall looking really cool. It's pretty big, and you can see that it's clipping right here on the edge of the domain. So let's free this. I'm going to scale it in on the Y a little bit. It doesn't need that much space on the Y axis, but it needs more on the X. And a little more on the Z. Make sure you choose period 3D cursor to scale it on the Z so it can rise up in the air a little further. Now we're going to turn up the resolution. You can see this tiny cube in the corner. This tiny cube is telling you what the resolution of your smoke is. So this is like 1 3D pixel. It's 1 voxel. And this whole cube is filled with them. So if we set this to 65, you'll notice it shrink a tiny bit. You don't want to set it to 65. You want to set it to something that is going to be a binary multiple. So for now, I'm going to use 128 resolution divisions. So the last thing we're going to want to do is set this floor plane as part of the smoke simulation. However, you can't just set a plane as part of the simulation. It has to be a solid object. So instead of setting this floor plane, we're going to Shift A mesh, add in a cube, and scale it on Z-axis, something like that. S, Shift Z, and make it about the same size as the plane, maybe a little smaller so we can actually still select our plane. Scale it on the Y-axis. Choose Fluid, None, and Effector. You can also set this to be a flow object. Just set it to geometry and then set the initial temperature to be like -3, and it will act as dust on the ground. That can give a really cool effect. I've seen some other people do it, and it's really nice. However, for now, I'm just going to use an effector and set that as collision. So I think we're ready to do a final bake. Let's just bake this a couple frames and see how it's looking. Alright, so I just paused the bake, and I'm going to go Shift left arrow to move to the first frame, and spacebar to play. And that looks pretty cool. Now, we're not really getting enough noise. I might turn the noise up. However, as you turn the resolution up, your noise is also going to kind of increase. So you want to be really careful with that. If you want more bubbles and smaller ones, then you just add more particles and turn their size down. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to select our sphere here and turn this up to maybe 2,000 particles, and then go and turn the flow source down to maybe 0.7. We'll try that, I hope. And I'm going to do a final bake. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't. If I was making a explosion for a film, for instance, a short film, I would not do the final bake yet. I would continue tweaking it until it is exactly how I want it. So anyways, go ahead and bake this at 192, and I will come back when it is completely done. Alright, so I just finished that bake, and if I scroll back to the first frame and play this, you can see that there is a small problem, and that is that I seem to have turned the particles, instead of from 1000 to 2000, I actually turned them from 1000 to 200, which wasn't what I was planning, but it actually doesn't look that bad. It gives the explosion a very unique look. It's very, very wide now, and you can see that the main blast in the middle is got more particles, like it's got arms, basically. I am going to rebake it with 2,000 particles, but I'm not going to do it yet. We're going to work on the material first. Now, after I baked the initial simulation at 192 resolution divisions, I actually went ahead, checked noise, and just baked it at the default settings so we can get some extra detail in there. So once you've gone ahead and baked that, let's do the lighting. So I'm gonna scrub to maybe frame 50. That's a pretty decent frame, and I'm gonna go up here, add in a camera, Control Alt Numpad 0, and then I'm gonna go maybe move it out, and then Control B, select just the camera. That's gonna make it so that in cycles, nothing outside of the camera view is rendered. We are going to be using cycles to create the materials for this, just because cycles is nicer. Choose rendered, and don't switch this to the shader editor yet. Go over here, switch to cycles. If you have a GPU, use your GPU, and then I'm going to set the world to, I'll leave it at gray. I'll go over here and choose transparency. Then I'm going to grab the sun lamp, rotate this. I'm going to have this coming in from the right. I'm going to turn it up to 12, duplicate it, rotate it so that it's coming in from kind of the back left, and set it to bluish. Leave it at 10. Go to the front view and rotate it so it's at more of an angle. This plane right here is also not going to be rendered. Give it a new material, set it to diffuse, and then give it a dark brown, so it's kind of the color of the ground. Then go over here, visibility, and just turn off the camera, so it can't be seen by the camera, but it's still calculated. Now this cube right here can be, you can uncheck everything, and I think we're set up. So select your domain again, and switch this to the shader editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn up the density, and yeah, that doesn't look terrible. I'm actually going to delete this and add in an input volume info, plug the density in right here, add in a converter color ramp, move this forward just a tiny bit, then add in a converter math node, set it to multiply, turn that up. 75 is good. I'm also going to go to our render settings under light paths, turn volume bounces up to 2, and then go under volumes and set the step size down to 0.2 so that it renders faster. It's not as accurate, but that's okay. We just want it to render fast at the moment. Explosions are not going to have this perfectly white look, so you're going to turn it down dark and then maybe give it a tiny bit of color, like it's kicked up some of the dirt. You can actually use the density to control the color if you want to. I'm going to unplug that though for now and just leave it all one color. This is a simple explosion, not an advanced one. Then let's go and add in an input and attribute node, and we're going to type in heat. Sometimes I use the density to control the fire, but for now we're just going to use the heat. Plug the color right here into the emission color. I'm going to choose converter color ramp. And then we're going to use the strength value right here on our node, turn that up, and I'm going to turn this contrast up. Add a new color ramp right here, make it a nice orange color, something like that. I'm going to change this to be yellow and then set its value to maybe 3. Instead of using white, we're just going to use yellow set to a high value of 3 to get something like that. And that looks pretty cool. I mean, that's I'm going to also turn the saturation up, something like that, and then the density here up to 100. You can also use the density. One hand typing. Yeah, and you can see that's given an even different look, which isn't bad. Again, it looks okay. Now you'll notice the explosion looks a little weird, like it's not fully rendered or something, and then there's like these lines in it. That's because we set this step size so high. If I set it to 0.05, it's going to render a lot slower, but it's going to look nicer. I can crank this up. Yeah, and then if I turn the saturation on this up, and the saturation on this up. Now, one other thing you can do, which I do quite a lot, is set this color ramp that's controlling the density to constant. And this will give you a truly dense explosion. You're going to have to set this down to maybe 10. Let's try 20. Yeah, that's okay. And then you're going to need to set this down even further. The denser it is, the further this is going to have to be set down. Now, it definitely has problems, and one of the main problems is that it's super low resolution. For a very low resolution simulation, though, this is looking pretty damn good. I think it would be worth rendering it out. In any case, I'm going to save this version of the material. I am going to render this out, but I want to see what else we can do with this material. So I'm just going to duplicate it, the whole thing, and move it up here, and then click on this. And that will allow us to get control over the material. So if I turn the emission all the way off, let's look at just the smoke. This actually looks really nice. Like, I don't know. A lot of people love the big orange fiery explosions, which, whatever. I like the power of the explosions that are just dust, that have obviously just kicked up tons of dust. There's not a whole lot of detail in this explosion, which kind of sucks. One thing that you want to make sure of is that your material down here is set not at linear, it's set to cubic. It will make your explosion look slightly less detailed, but it will get rid of some weird artifacts. Before I do a final render, I'm going to select this so it's rendering this material that we set up. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do a render at 20%, and I'll turn this to 0.1 so it renders nice and fast, and then I'll turn the bounces off. I'm doing this so that I can get an idea of the actual flow of the simulation, like how its movement is going to look in the end. I don't want to render for like 2 days straight a animation just to find out that it's actually not moving right. It's got some weird motion. So make sure the whole thing is in camera, of course. I'm going to choose period 3D cursor, double tap R. Alright, so I'm going to render this out, and then once it's done rendering out, if it's good, I'm going to do a final render, and once the final render is done, I'm going to bake it at higher resolution. 256 is about the minimum I would recommend baking at, so I'm going to use 256 or 320 or 420 if I'm feeling really excited about the simulation, and then I'm going to call it done. So here's what I got from that bake, and you can see it looks pretty decent. It's pretty low resolution and there's some weird glitching going on. Once I turned up the resolution and actually added 2000 particles to that medium blast, I got this, which looks pretty nice. And then tweaking the material a tiny bit, I got this one, which I actually really like, even though it's a little low resolution still. I actually turned the resolution up to 512 and got this, but there's some clipping going on at the right, which is kind of annoying, so I was unable to use that. Then after changing the material and doing a little more tweaking, I got this, and this is my favorite result. It's not super high resolution, but it does look pretty good, and it worked very nicely in some other rendered footage that I had. Very nice, unique feel. It's kind of a tan color, so it looks like there's dirt getting kicked up, and there's a nice balance between fire and smoke. Now, keep in mind that your material is more than half of what makes a good explosion. Just from one simulation, you can get a ton of different looks just by messing around with the material. So keep that in mind and play around with it. Try to get familiar with making fancy materials, because that can really be a strength when making simulations. Another thing that MantaFlow is really good at is fire. You have to go pretty high resolution to get some good results, but it can make almost completely photorealistic results just with MantaFlow. So anyways, that's basically it. The only downside that I find to MantaFlow is that it's really slow. It's kind of too slow, but hopefully in the future MantaFlow can get sped up a bit and Blender can be, I don't know, on par at least with some of the simulation software out there. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. This is Iridesium.